If you are one of those people who looks at your life and wonders why the same painful situations keep happening, why you always react the same way, or why you feel like there is something controlling you from within that you cannot identify, then you need to understand what Carl Jung really meant when he talked about making the unconscious conscious. Before we dive deep into this life-changing revelation, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. This kind of content takes enormous research and dedication to bring you, and your support helps me continue sharing these profound psychological insights that can truly transform your existence. Carl Gustav Jung was not just another psychologist. He was a man who dared to explore the darkest corners of the human psyche, and what he discovered there was both terrifying and liberating. When Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate," he was revealing one of the most powerful truths about human existence that most people spend their entire lives never understanding. Think about your own life for a moment. How many times have you found yourself in situations where you thought, "Here we go again"? How many times have you attracted the same type of romantic partner who ends up hurting you in the exact same way? How many times have you sabotaged yourself just when success was within reach? How many times have you reacted with anger, fear, or sadness in ways that surprised even you? Most people call this bad luck. They call it coincidence. They call it fate. But Jung discovered something far more profound and empowering. He discovered that these patterns are not random at all. They are the direct result of unconscious forces within your psyche that are running your life like a puppet master, pulling strings you cannot see. The unconscious mind, according to Jung, is not just a storage place for forgotten memories. It is a living, breathing, incredibly powerful force that contains everything you have repressed, denied, ignored, or refused to acknowledge about yourself. It contains your deepest fears, your most shameful desires, your unhealed wounds, and your unlived potential. And here is the shocking truth that Jung discovered. If you do not make these unconscious contents conscious, they will control your life from the shadows. Let me give you a concrete example that will make this crystal clear. Imagine a woman who grew up with an emotionally distant father. As a child, she learned that love meant chasing someone who was unavailable, that she had to work incredibly hard to get even the smallest amount of attention, and that men ultimately leave. Now, as an adult, she finds herself repeatedly attracted to emotionally unavailable men. She chases them, tries to fix them, gives everything of herself, and then feels devastated when they inevitably leave or fail to give her the love she craves. On the surface, she might say she wants a loving, committed relationship. She might even believe that she deserves better, but unconsciously, she's being driven by the wounded child within her who learned that love equals suffering, that she's not worthy of consistent affection, and that men cannot be trusted to stay. Her unconscious mind is literally creating her reality based on these early programming patterns. This is what Jung meant when he said the unconscious will direct your life. It is not that some external force called fate is determining your experiences. It is that your own unconscious mind is magnetizing, creating, and perpetuating the very situations that confirm its deepest beliefs about reality. But here is where it gets even more fascinating and disturbing. The unconscious does not just influence your choices in relationships. It influences everything: your career patterns, your financial situations, your health issues, your friendships, your self-sabotaging behaviors, even the way you talk to yourself in your own mind. Every area of your life where you feel stuck, where you keep repeating the same painful patterns, where you feel like you are fighting against some invisible force, that is your unconscious mind at work. Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon, and he discovered that the unconscious mind operates through what he called complexes. These are like autonomous psychological entities within your psyche that have their own agenda, their own emotional charge, and their own way of hijacking your conscious awareness. When a complex is activated, you literally become possessed by it. You stop being your rational, conscious self and start acting out the programming of the complex. Have you ever had the experience of getting triggered by something and then reacting in a way that felt completely out of proportion to the situation? Have you ever found yourself saying or doing things that you later regretted, wondering where that reaction came from? That is a complex taking over your consciousness. That is your unconscious mind directing your life while you call it fate or bad luck or just the way things are. The woman, in our example, has what Jung would call a father complex. Every time she encounters a man who reminds her unconscious mind of her father, this complex gets activated. Suddenly, she is no longer a grown woman making conscious choices about her love life. She becomes the wounded little girl who desperately needs daddy's approval and will do anything to get it. The complex literally possesses her consciousness and drives her behavior. But Jung did not stop at just identifying this problem. He discovered the solution, and it is both simple and revolutionary. The way to break free from these unconscious patterns is to make them conscious. You have to bring the shadow contents of your psyche into the light of awareness. You have to face the parts of yourself that you have been running from, denying or projecting onto others. This process is not easy. In fact, it is one of the most challenging things a human being can do. It requires you to look at your own darkness, to acknowledge your own wounds, to take responsibility for your own patterns instead of blaming external circumstances or other people. It requires you to become intimate with the parts of yourself that you have spent your whole life trying to avoid. When the woman in our example begins to make her father complex conscious, she has to face the pain of her childhood. She has to acknowledge how deeply she was wounded by her father's emotional unavailability. She has to recognize how this wound has been unconsciously driving her romantic choices. She has to feel the grief of never having received the love she needed as a child. And she has to take responsibility for the fact that she has been unconsciously recreating this dynamic over and over again in her adult relationships. This is painful work. It is much easier to stay unconscious, to keep blaming the men in her life for being emotionally unavailable, to keep believing that she is just unlucky in love. But Jung discovered that this unconscious approach leads to a life of repetitive suffering, a life where you feel like a victim of circumstances beyond your control. The moment you begin to make the unconscious conscious, everything changes. Suddenly, you are no longer at the mercy of invisible forces. You begin to see the patterns. You begin to understand why you make the choices you make. You begin to recognize when a complex is getting activated, and you can choose to respond differently. The process of making the unconscious conscious is what Jung called individuation. It is the journey of becoming who you truly are, rather than who your unconscious programming has conditioned you to be. It is the path from being lived by your complexes to living consciously from your authentic self. But here is what most people do not understand about this process. Making the unconscious conscious is not just an intellectual exercise. You cannot think your way out of unconscious patterns. You cannot simply read about your complexes and expect them to disappear. The unconscious speaks in the language of symbols, emotions, dreams, and body sensations. To truly make it conscious, you have to engage with it on its own terms. Jung discovered that the unconscious communicates with us constantly through our dreams. Every night, your unconscious mind is sending you messages about what needs to be integrated, what needs to be healed, what needs to be acknowledged. But most people ignore their dreams or dismiss them as meaningless random brain activity. Jung knew better. He spent his entire life studying dreams and discovered that they are the royal road to making the unconscious conscious. Your dreams will show you your complexes in action. They will reveal your deepest fears, your unlived potential, your shadow aspects that you refuse to acknowledge in waking life. They will present you with symbols and scenarios that, when properly understood, can guide you toward greater consciousness and freedom. But dreams are not the only way the unconscious communicates. It also speaks through your emotional reactions, especially the ones that feel disproportionate or irrational. Every time you have a strong emotional response to something, your unconscious is trying to tell you something important. Instead of dismissing these reactions or trying to suppress them, Jung encouraged people to get curious about them. What is this emotion trying to tell me? What wound is being triggered? What complex is being activated? What part of my unconscious is demanding attention? When you start asking these questions instead of just reacting unconsciously, you begin the process of making the unconscious conscious. The unconscious also communicates through your body. Jung understood that psychological complexes create physical tension, illness, and symptoms. The body holds the memory of every unprocessed trauma, every repressed emotion, every unlived aspect of your being. When you start paying attention to your body's messages, when you start feeling into the places where you hold tension or pain, you are accessing unconscious material that wants to be integrated. Projection is another powerful way the unconscious reveals itself. Jung discovered that we tend to project our own unconscious contents onto other people. The things that trigger you most intensely in others are often reflections of your own shadow aspects that you refuse to acknowledge. The woman who keeps attracting emotionally unavailable men is projecting her own emotional unavailability onto them. The man who constantly complains about dishonest people is likely avoiding his own capacity for deception. When you start recognizing your projections, when you start asking yourself what this person or situation is reflecting back to you about your own unconscious, you begin to reclaim the power you have been giving away. You stop being a victim of other people's behavior and start taking responsibility for your own psychological material. But perhaps the most profound way to make the unconscious conscious is through what Jung called active imagination. This is a technique where you dialogue directly with the unconscious contents of your psyche. You might imagine having a conversation with the part of you that sabotages your success, or the part that attracts toxic relationships, or the part that is afraid of being truly seen. Through active imagination, you can begin to understand the positive intention behind even your most destructive patterns. The part of you that sabotages success might be trying to protect you from the vulnerability that comes with visibility. The part that attracts toxic relationships might be trying to heal an old wound by recreating familiar dynamics. When you understand the unconscious logic behind your patterns, you can begin to find healthier ways to meet those underlying needs. This is the revolutionary insight that Jung offered to humanity. You are not doomed to repeat the same patterns forever. You are not a victim of fate or bad luck or external circumstances. You have the power to transform your life by making the unconscious conscious, but it requires courage, commitment, and a willingness to face the parts of yourself that you have been avoiding. The process is not linear. It is not something you do once, and then you are done. Making the unconscious conscious is a lifelong journey of deepening self-awareness and integration. There will always be new layers to discover, new complexes to integrate, new aspects of your shadow to acknowledge and embrace. But here is what happens when you commit to this path. You begin to live from choice rather than compulsion. You begin to respond to life rather than react unconsciously. You begin to create your reality from conscious intention rather than unconscious programming. You begin to experience true freedom, the freedom that comes from knowing yourself so deeply that no unconscious force can hijack your life without your awareness. The woman in our example, when she makes her father complex conscious, can finally choose partners based on their actual availability and compatibility, rather than their ability to trigger her childhood wounds. She can recognize when the complex is getting activated and choose to respond from her adult self rather than her wounded child. She can break the cycle of repetitive suffering and create the loving relationship she truly desires. This is what Jung meant when he said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. He was not condemning you to a life of unconscious suffering. He was pointing you toward the path of liberation. He was showing you that you have the power to transform your life by transforming your relationship with your own unconscious mind. The question is, are you ready to take responsibility for your own psychological material? Are you ready to stop blaming external circumstances for your repetitive patterns? Are you ready to face the parts of yourself that you have been running from? Are you ready to do the deep work of making the unconscious conscious? If your answer is yes, then you are ready to begin the most important journey of your life. You are ready to move from being lived by unconscious forces to living consciously from your authentic self. You are ready to transform your fate into conscious choice. Start paying attention to your dreams. Start getting curious about your emotional reactions. Start noticing your projections. Start dialoguing with the different parts of your psyche. Start treating your symptoms and patterns as messages from your unconscious rather than problems to be eliminated. This is not easy work, but it is the most rewarding work you will ever do. Because when you make the unconscious conscious, you do not just change your life. You become the author of your own destiny. You become truly free. What patterns in your own life are you ready to make conscious? What unconscious forces have been directing your choices without your awareness? Share your insights in the comments below, and remember to subscribe for more content that can help you on this profound journey of self-discovery and transformation.